Maybe we can reduce it.
As I said, other people have been walking in.
Yeah, they're just walking in.
They need cooling. Thank you, Satasan. Okay, I'm inclined to get started and see if we get joined by others. Can everybody hear me? Catherine, can you hear me? Cool. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to NDI. Thanks for making the long, hot trek out here. We appreciate your presence. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sandra Pepper, and I'm the Director for Gender, Women and Democracy here at NDI. It's a great pleasure for me to moderate the panel this afternoon for a number of reasons. At NDI, we have a very strong interest in movements. One of our core sectors, if you like, is citizen participation. And from our perspective, and our approach says that even the act of participation is an empowerment in itself. So regardless of whether you achieve anything, the fact that you've engaged is in itself an empowerment. And from the perspective of gender and women, we know that many women and new entrants to politics come into politics through movements. And so they are important sort of foundational avenues and routes for new entrants to the political sphere. We also know that movements can actually influence and change political institutions. At the moment, my team is doing some work on early party development, and we're looking at early party development from three kind of routes, from non-violent social movements to political parties, from organized armed groups to political parties, but also from the disintegration of a political party. So even there, you can see, for example, in places like Tunisia, in Italy, where you've got Italy where they've got the clown, the former clown, the prime minister now, whatever it is, you can see that social movements are actually influencing greatly the political institutions that have somehow lost their connection with people. But we also can see that movements have a particular response. Some of them are very single issue. They don't necessarily speak to a broad cross-section of the population, but they seem to be a venue for a lot of activism, whereby people pick a number of single issues rather than joining a political party to be speaking across the piece. And in terms of the modalities that movements are using now, of course, we understand that online and technology, digital platforms have given a new opportunity for social mobilization and action. So today, we really want to focus a bit on that intersection between the digital platform and the movement to action. And I've lost my piece of paper, which should tell me, no, it's here, sorry, on which I have actually got the CVs of our colleagues. So really pleased that we have three very different perspectives and very different voices this afternoon on this panel. And I'm going to introduce first Catherine Baird, who is sitting on the West Coast of America and works for Change.org. The short bio on the flyer that you've got in front of you. But I think the most important thing for us is, apart from her very long work in development and with a focus on women, she, at Change.org, she works with teams and partners across the world to deepen the impact of citizen-led campaigning and expand the multi-country She Creates Change initiative. Her focus brings together the reach and potential of technological innovation with community-led organizing for social change. So, Catherine, thanks very much for joining us. To my immediate right, Elsa Marie de Silva is the founder of Safe City and one of the fellows this year at the National Endowment for Democracy. Some of you may have seen the Safe City app and the Safe City website. Elsa Marie came to this because she was previously a pilot. So presumably,
no, I wasn't a pilot.
You weren't a pilot, but you were in the airline industry.
Yes.
So she had a view, at least, of geographic spread. And I think what's interesting about the work that Elsa has done and where she continues to do is two things. First of all, the use of the crowdsourced data to actually focus in on areas of potential danger for women. But also the expansion of the platform to now 5 or 6 different countries, which is an interesting development. And the way that even that initiative is also driving more and more political action and political engagement around the issues that are being surfaced by that initial crowdsourced data. So Elsa Marie, thank you very much for joining us today. And then to my left, finally, we have Joshua Olufemi, who is also a fellow this year at the National Endowment for Democracy, and he's from Nigeria. And Joshua is a media person. He's a management executive with 8 years of experience in investigative journalism, open data advocacy, civic innovation, and media development. He's trained over 300 journalists on data-driven journalism and has managed more than 8 accountability and governance projects on a range of issues, including election monitoring, public procurement, health, and press freedom. So again, somebody who is very much focused on data and driving political action. And thank you very much, Joshua, also for being on the panel today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to each of our panelists to talk for about 10 minutes. Then I'm going to kind of facilitate a bit of a conversation between the 3 of them, and then we'll open it up for much greater interaction from you all. So I hope that this is going to be an interactive and lively discussion. Let me start with Elsa Marie, and perhaps you'll give us a few minutes on the issue of using data collected from crowdsourcing for political action.
Thank you, Sandra. I'm really happy to be here, and thank you so much for coming on this very hot day. So I started Safe City as an immediate response to a horrific gang rape in India, where a young woman, Jyoti Singh, was gang raped on a bus. And, you know, it was a period, that incident kind of lifted the lid on the topic of sexual violence. And for the first time in my recollection, I heard everyone around me talking about it. It's one of those moments in a country's, you know, lifetime. And at the time I was in the aviation industry, I was vice president network planning for one of India's largest airlines, where, you know, I was responsible for optimizing about 500 daily flights. And so, you know, having been used to looking at data, I wanted to understand if everybody around me was sharing their story, what was the statistic for sexual violence in India? And I couldn't find anything. All I could find was this one common statistic, which even till date, we always talk about in any, you know, sexual violence panel or presentation. It's 1 in 3 women on an average around the world experience some form of sexual violence at least once in their lifetime. That's a global average. But I was interested in my country data and I couldn't find it. But to me, my sample size was pretty much like 100%. And a little before that, before this incident, I had come across Harass Map Egypt, which was crowd mapping sexual violence on the streets of Cairo. And I thought, okay, that's impressive. We need it in India, but it wasn't urgent. And so once this gang rape happened and, you know, I felt I wanted to contribute to the issue. I wanted to do something concrete, not just post something on Facebook, you know, put a black band on my arm or protest on the streets, which was all happening at the time. I wanted to do something concrete, and I thought, why not start something where women can document their experience of sexual violence? Now, why is it important to document it? It's important to document it because in 80% of cases, women and girls do not speak up. In fact, even if men, young boys are abused, they don't speak up. So we have a problem. We have a problem of a data gap. And therefore, this kind of platform where you allow and encourage for anonymous reporting actually helps to bridge that. So with that intention, we started it. We spread the word around and these stories started coming in. But then what do you do with these stories? So in the first place, I think it's very important to have these stories because it documents your incident. Second, it gives vocabulary to your experience. What I found in the last 6 years of doing this work is that many women and girls know that they've been violated. You get that feeling, but you don't quite know how to label it. And that the reason for it is because sexual violence is so normalized in our daily lives that we just accept it, or we are told to accept it as part of our daily routine, instead of encouraging us to speak up or deal with it, speak up and take action against it. The third is, if you don't document it, it never makes it to the official statistics, which leads to an accountability problem. So the police doesn't do anything because it's not showing up in their records. And therefore, the entire circle of insecure cultures gets promoted where the bystander also does nothing and the perpetrator just gets bolder over a period of time. How does this impact our lives? If you look at India, on every development index with regards to women, we are performing very badly. Okay, sexual violence and our lack of dealing with it actually results in women restricting their movements, and thereby restricting their opportunities, and therefore they, in a way, restrict their financial independence. So think about it. Young girls may stop going to school, or their parents and families, especially low-income communities, might use the excuse of safety to stop them from stepping out. The second is women don't venture very far from their homes to take up jobs. And if you look at our labor statistics right now, we have been on a decline. So from 42% of formal labor participation by women in India about 20 years ago, we are currently at 26%. And corporates who spend a lot of CSR money on providing life skills are finding it hard to get the same women to take up jobs. So it's money that is being put out there, but not translating into jobs. And women would like those jobs, but they're not allowed to go out, right? And then take further on your, how do you then rise up? We talk about women at leadership levels. If you can't get out and do the basic things that you need, how then do you rise up even your corporate ladder or take part in politics? And we just went through a massive election. People talk about India being a huge democracy, which is right. But when you think of democracy and women's participation in it, how does that translate? We are celebrating that we have increased our participation from 12% to 14%, which is a 2% jump, right? But we have a 33% quota, which is not filled. So in reality, it's nothing to celebrate about. How have we used the data? We've used the data in small neighborhood communities to drive accountability at the local level, whether it is to get the police to increase vigilance and better security measures, or municipalities to fix broken infrastructure, like public toilets seems to be a big issue, lighting seems to be a big issue. Currently, we are working with the Mumbai Railways where we are auditing the infrastructure, because in Mumbai, the hotspots seem to be along the railway lines. And of course, we are talking about a city where you have 24 million people, living and working over there. But does that mean that women's safety has to be compromised? No. So when you have the data, you can actually focus on those interventions that can drive accountability and change. We've also started working in the rural areas. Now, in rural areas, women may not actually have access to an app or their own phone, but we found that they use one common phone in their midst. So if one woman has the phone and if their local governance structure, that's the sarpanch, he or she assigns this person to be responsible, everybody will go to her, get their reports uploaded, and then they, kind of drive the accountability. So we've used the data to actually start the dialogue in the community as to help them understand what's going on, and how they can be part of that change. Second, the data itself will identify patterns and trends that can be worked upon. So who do you bring into the room? Is it the police? Is it the religious leaders to educate the community, especially the men and boys? Or is it, the municipality that needs to provide better governance? Or even elected representatives who made parts of their budget available for maybe like CCTV cameras or other things that can improve security. So that is really where we've seen the most impact at the local level, trying to drive this accountability. And at the high level, we are working with the police in 3 or 4 cities where we send them dashboards every month. And just having the data in the public domain, I feel, drives accountability on their part, because in my country, we don't have open data like the US. So to have any kind of crime data at the street level, you would have to make what is known as a right to information application to every police station, which is impossible. So, but having this in the public domain actually makes them more responsible in providing better security.
Right. Well, thank you, Elsa. It's a great start. And I think there's a lot there. My team will know that my latest sort of aphorism is that it's hard to govern without an interest in facts. And I think really what Elsa has set out for us is that exact point, that it's really hard to change anything or do anything if you don't have an interest in the facts that underlie it. So thanks for starting us off, Elsa. Joshua, why don't you tell us about your experience?
Right. I'll try and provide a background to Nigeria, and then the work that I do, and how data, either at crowdsourcing level or even as an empowering tool, is being kind of deployed in my organization. And the background for Nigeria is it's a country with roughly about 180 to 197 million people, and you cannot pinpoint any tangible data to drive policy, or either to even speak to issues of accountability at the government level or at the open government, open data space. And so for us as journalists, facing the global crisis of, revenue, looking at ways to better tell stories, compelling stories, and be able to hold government accountable, which is primarily the role of the media, and also giving voice to our citizens was a challenge. How do we, get citizens to, provide us information that can become like, how can we use them to drive these sources? And how can we also use government data that isn't available to also demand accountability or to empower citizens? These are, questions we were asking ourselves in my organization. And then we started doing some, observation and research, and realized that we probably need to generate that data ourselves. And how do we generate it? One, you don't have local or grassroots media as such in Nigeria. So the strong media outlets you have are in, urban cities. And when they even do these stories of accountability, they probably go just about 20 kilometers, wide. And the citizens you're telling their stories don't get to, understand or participate in that whole environment of work. So we started thinking, why don't we give citizens the little that we have as information, turn it into an app? So we started looking at technology and data, providing that to citizens and telling them to tell stories of, service delivery, attack on the media, or even corruption that they encounter every day. The first experiment we did in 2017 was to gather available data on, primary healthcare centers in the country, and then give that back to citizens and say, just tell us in your own local government or in wherever you access primary health care, what is working and what isn't working. And that was, how we started saying that it isn't even how much we are able to tell the story, but it's how much citizens are, can tell us a better story. Now, with the information they gave us was not only helping us to give on the ground, reality or more compelling, arguments to how corruption, procurement, or misappropriation of budget and some other form of wrongdoing in procurement process in the country was going on. We also started seeing failures of government at instances where you hear things like $1 million being committed to X number of primary healthcare centers, equipment, and citizens are saying they don't even have any of these things. There isn't even a doctor or a nurse or a community health worker in those places. So it was using the information at the hands of citizens. How did we do this? We asked ourselves if internet penetration, yes, we have a large internet penetration in Nigeria, but when you go to the grassroots communities, you don't have that. So we said, what tool can we use? How can we just use SMSs? So we said, send us short messages to just describe in your own word what you are experiencing. That was first attempt at it. And as journalists also, we realized that our own safety, was also a major challenge. Journalists, we kind of feel like we are heroes sometimes. And so when we get beaten or, equipment, destroyed, it makes us feel good. But there are bigger issues, that we encountered. It started creating some level of self-censorship. What story will I do that will not put me in too much trouble? And the impact of that on citizens and accountability was, quite negative. So we decided to say, why don't we create another, crowdsourcing tool, and citizens and journalists can report attack on the press. And we saw that before it's more or less like rhetoric. When you say to government that state actors and non-state actors are attacking journalists in whichever way, they say, no, give us evidence. And so we decided to even come from history. We went to all, newspaper and reports that have documented attack on the press since an important period in Nigeria's history of attack on the press since 1983. So we kind of documented that, and then we took it forward and said journalists in the associations and citizens can report more. We saw that in the period of 2 years, into that, we were able to record about 120 attack on the press. So it became a tool for us to also then start advocacy to government and say, this is how much you are endangering the democracy, because without voice, without accountability from the media, then your democracy is faulty. And so we used it to do advocacy to state actors and non-state actors. But also created something that was more interesting. It created a bond, a kind of bond among journalists, which translated into another project, which was looking at not only the physical attack on journalists, not only the digital attack on the cyber attack, but we also saw that there was also the psychological attack. And then journalists started rallying around themselves and doing hangouts to even just vent some of these frustrations. And then you see how just getting journalists and citizens to talk about the challenges of journalism or attack on them created another movement around, let us not just be voice to the voiceless, but let also care about our own welfare as a challenge. But at the larger scale of crowdsourcing or using data to drive mobilization or social accountability was in Nigeria the greatest amount of corruption cases you would hear. It's in our budgeting and procurement process. So we thought to ourselves, journalists don't have data to follow the money, sort of, or to go investigate. So we gathered the little data that we could get, make them machine readable and should make them open to citizens. And so journalists had, information about location of, government procurement projects. They had the names of the contractors. so they knew at least to some degree of accuracy the location of those projects. And so they went there and they were doing the reporting. But we thought that wasn't enough. We probably can do one great investigation in 2 months, but that means in every budget cycle, you will only be able to showcase 6 or maybe stories of corruption in the entire country. So we decided, why don't we give this data and give it to citizens themselves to see. So we started what we call Udemy, which is a social accountability platform on Twitter, and some kind of naming and shaming. So we said to citizens, do you know that this amount of money has been given to or has been allocated to this representative from your community? And this is how much is done with it. This is what he hasn't done with it. So the citizens took it upon themselves to ask direct questions. They asked them their representatives and say, so what does happen? We knew we were supposed to have a borehole, a primary health care, you were supposed to build as a school, we're at distance. So it created, a mobilization among citizens. And, interestingly, citizens are taking their representatives to court and say, you were supposed to provide this, we can't see it, And, in the long run, the impact or the outcome we saw from it was that when the election cycle came, citizens had more, they were able to make better decisions about who to vote for and who not to vote for, realizing that this representative for 4, years has done pretty much nothing. As other instances, when citizens ask questions, we see the representative go back or the contractors go back to the field and get the project started. So these are like, range of how, we've tried to see how can you use citizens to give you the data, or how can you give this data back to citizens and let them drive the accountability work themselves. At another level, we try to look at Nigeria's, when talking of corruption or development challenge, you have a lot of it. You have a lot of civil society organizations, journalists that are trying to resolve these issues. But the data gap is a challenge. The government started this initiative as part of the anti-corruption campaign, which is to say citizens should report or whistleblow when they see any issue of corruption in the country. How do you whistleblow to a government through an email and imagine that you won't be, a victim or be attacked? So we thought it's okay. It's good that there's an incentive for that. But we will create an anonymous platform where citizens can whistleblow. And in the space of 18 months, we've gotten about 100, leaks, on the platform. We've done a lot of stories. One of the stories is a leading investigation in the country now in the electricity sector, where, but what's more empowering for us is not just creating that platform for citizens to whistleblow. It's what is able to do within the media ecosystem in the country. Naturally, newsrooms or news outlets are naturally competitive. But the leaks NG platform in Nigeria, how we rally around it is not to say, keep only Premium Times or my own newspaper at the leak. Every time citizens send the leak, about 8 newsrooms get that information. So you take away the challenge of trust of citizens saying my story has been silenced. But it's also helping us to innovate around competition, because then newsrooms have to come together. Different newspapers have to come together and say, how do we go with this story? We started doing collaborative investigations together. And so when the newspaper writes a story, typically, or does an investigation, typically, what you get from subject of that investigation is they go to other newsrooms and say, help us do a spin of that story. But in this situation, 8 leading investigative journalism outlets have published a story. Where are you going? Who's going to help you spin the story? Who's going to help you? So that's kind of so it's empowered, it's created a collaborative, journalism ecosystem in the country. It was also able to put government on its toe, and it was also helping the genuine anti-corruption agencies to have evidence to run with.
Great, thanks, Joshua. I think the things that I'm hoping Catherine might pick up in that from what Joshua has just said this issue of scalability, because I know you work at the grassroots as well, and we all can find ourselves working in very small, sort of almost niche spaces. But clearly, you're looking through change.org and how you scale up and create greater momentum. So perhaps in your presentation, you'll speak a bit to that issue as well.
Definitely. And hello, and thank you so much for having me all the way from across the country here in San Francisco. I really appreciate. Unfortunately, I can't see the audience. I can just see the panel, but I'll hope everyone else can hear me. So yes, change.org is the world's largest platform for social change. It has engaged 26 million people in social change campaigns on a huge variety of issues, and thousands of different issues across the world. And there have been big victories in terms of how people have used the platform to really push for significant change on issues affecting their lives, on their communities, at the national level. You know, on everything from improving maternal health rights in India to ending secret votes in the Brazilian parliament, through to a story, you know, that I tell a lot about a woman whose daughter in Argentina almost died because she was on a life support machine and they kept having power cuts at home. And Mariella wanted to get a guaranteed backup electricity generator from her electrical company to make sure that whenever there was a power cut, her daughter's life wouldn't be threatened. And so what she did, like many other people around the world, was she started a petition on change.org. And so the way that change.org works is that anyone, anywhere can start a petition to push for change on a specific issue, to identify who is the best person, either in the government or, you know, in a city council, who can kind of make that happen for them. And then it helps them to gather support and to gather people to sign the petitions online, through social media, through email. And so Mariella did this. She generated a huge amount of support from across Argentina to get her daughter a backup generator. But what she realized throughout the course of that campaign, and what she realized from the thousands of people who reached out to her, was that her daughter wasn't alone, that there were many other people across the country who were also suffering from these power cuts, and who also needed, you know, life-saving electrical equipment in their homes. And so what she did after she got the backup generator for her daughter was she started a second campaign to actually change the law in Argentina to guarantee that anybody who needed life support machines in their house would be given a backup generator by their electricity company. And she was successful over a period of a year or so. She met with congressional leaders, she went to committee hearings, she testified in front of the Congress, and eventually last year her law passed. And the reason I tell that story is because I think it really speaks to the heart of what change.org's model is, which is this idea that that change is driven by can be driven by people's personal experiences, by human-centered issues and the way that those issues are affecting people's daily lives, and also that those people themselves can be the activists, the change makers on those particular issues, and that through telling their story, through mobilizing public support, through getting media attention, and through connecting with the right decision maker, that people can actually really, you know, make those changes happen on the issues that maybe perhaps political leaders, you know, weren't even paying attention to because they didn't have any direct experience of that. And so that philosophy is really at the center of change.org, and actually is the basis of this massive, you know, global technology. The work that I do with the Change.org Foundation, which is an entity that was set up 3 years ago now, was we started the Change.org Foundation because we saw that there was a huge opportunity to deepen this work. So to deepen the work that was already happening on the Change.org technology platform. But we were thinking, okay, specifically, you know, what could we actually be doing around how could we reach groups that maybe weren't getting organic access to the platform? How can we engage with civic opportunities better, like elections, like consultations? How can we build stronger relationships with political leaders, for example? Or even how can we build and design the next generation of civic technology that is responsive to the political contexts in which we work? And so we've started this work with a focus on 2 regions where Change.org has a big presence already, Latin America and Asia, where we have over 60 million people who've already engaged with the platform. And what we're doing there is designing and building in partnership with teams of people who live and work in those countries. And Elsa has, I think, my colleagues in India have worked closely with Elsa before as well, to identify, okay, what would these interventions look like? And I think one of the projects that I have talked a little bit about before with Sandra and her team is the She Creates Change program, which was mentioned at the beginning. And I think this was really the opportunity that we saw that really pushed us to think about, okay, what can we do to deepen this impact beyond the Change.org platform? And this was driven basically by a realization that in India, where Change.org has an enormous presence, where millions of people come to the platform to support campaigns, where people are starting campaigns on a huge range of issues, only 23% of the people who were starting campaigns were women. And this was interesting because obviously we want that to be 50-50. But what was also interesting was that even though there was such a lower percentage of women starting campaigns, the campaigns that were started by women were more likely to win. They were more likely to achieve the change that they were seeking. And we could see trends which were around women being strong storytellers, strong community mobilizers, being very dedicated once they did start a campaign to seeing it all the way through. Interestingly, that thesis was then backed up by some research that was done by the Harvard Kennedy School, analyzing data from Change.org campaigns across the world, which showed again that across the world, women are less likely to start campaigns on different social change issues. But when they do, again, they are more likely to be successful. So what we began to think then, and this was very much led by our director, Preeti Herman, and the team in India, which was, what would it look like to do a massive intervention on, women, on creating more women change leaders in India? And we started out thinking, okay, what it means is that we just need to really encourage women to, start more campaigns. How do we do that? And over the last 3 years, we've been on a journey which has really identified that the 2 key things, the 2 key points of intervention for getting more women to step up and to lead campaigns around, many of the issues that are affecting their lives, is changing the view of personal agency. So the belief that a person has that they can affect change, that they can take action. And sometimes in many countries that we work in across the world, and in particular for women, that really means like challenging it on a very deep level. Potentially women have been told, as Elsa mentioned, you can't go outside, you can't do the job that you want, you can't go to the school that you want, their choices have been very limited. But even in other contexts or in other countries where potentially that is not, as extreme, there is still this question of supporting people on a journey to understand that they actually have personal agency and they can use it. But what we found is that alone is not enough. What we also need is people to feel supported. They need to be part of a community that supports them to go on this social change journey. Because we know that taking action, it can be very scary, and that actually people are much, much more likely to do that if they feel part of a community. And so this has been the basis of the She Creates Change program. We now train several hundred women every year in India through a 5-day intensive training and then a year-long community of support that they become part of to start their own campaigns about the issues that they feel strongly about and to work together on those campaigns. But more than that, we've made a massive investment in understanding, okay, we also need women to be seen in the media. They need to be on primetime television. They need to be featured in news articles. They need to be seen as social change leaders. And when we do that, it creates a ripple effect where then we can actually see that more women are inspired to start campaigns across change.org. We've had thousands of women-led campaigns start in the last 3 years in India through this program, and more women are inspired to step up and be leaders. And now we're working on this in Brazil and also in Indonesia, and hoping to roll it out to the rest of the countries that we work in as well, across Asia and Latin America. But there is a question, and that's one of the ways that we are, to address Sandra's question about scaling, is we're not seeing these as like individual women or individual people starting individual campaigns. Many of them do, for example, around getting better street lights outside metro stations, which I know was mentioned earlier. That's been a very successful campaign that we've had in Delhi, led by a woman there. But it's also about, you know, creating this ripple effect and this kind of view of women being social change leaders to inspire other women. But what we also do is we don't just want people starting campaigns to be shouting to no one, right? We don't want to be generating mass mobilization for petitions, either online, but also through offline events, for example, where no one is listening. The key piece of the work that we do here is around connecting, what we call creating an enabling environment. But what we mean by that really is connecting people who start campaigns around many different issues to the appropriate decision maker or political leader who can help make that change happen. And so what that means is that we facilitate meetings between people with everyone from local council people to government ministers, and we ensure that if a person, you know, has a campaign that is getting significant support, and oftentimes that's helped by the online mobilization, the thousands and thousands of people who will sign a petition, for example, around, you know, for example, Miriella's campaign got 200,000 people to sign a petition. And so we use that as a way to generate media attention. We use both the public support and the media attention to get the decision makers' attention. And then when we have that, we facilitate a meeting and really try to have a productive dialogue. We try and see it as an opportunity for dialogue. And some government officials are obviously more responsive than others. You know, the mayor of Buenos Aires in Argentina has really come on board and has committed that every week he and his team will respond to, you know, 2 campaigns through change.org, through to other, you know, countries. I mean, you know, like in Indonesia, where we've built relationships with people in the parliament, but it's taken many, many years. In Thailand, where we have a team, the context is even more challenging. But we really view that idea of a dialogue. And then we also build a reinforcement. So where political leaders do engage, we then really publicize that response. We share it through the Change.org platform with all the people who've signed the petition, as a way of kind of showcasing and encouraging further participation from political leaders, so celebrating, you know, the dialogue that they're engaging with citizens. So that's an introduction, to the work that we've been doing. And through the Change.org Foundation, what we're really looking at is this question of how do we build stronger movements? How do we reach different, you know, groups that don't necessarily organically access the Change.org platform today? How can we really be pushing to make sure that citizens and people are in dialogue with decision makers about the issues that are affecting their lives?
Great. Well, thanks very much. Thanks, Catherine. That was a really good kind of bringing together of a number of the points that have been discussed. So I'm just going to, whilst you're all thinking about your interventions, I'm just going to kind of have a bit of a conversation here. One of the issues that I wanted to ask about is, how do you screen the data? Are there implicit risks in accepting crowdsourced data and then turning that into something that you do point at a politician or try and mobilize people around? What do you do? I think, Elsa, you had a couple of stories about...
So I must say that though we are crowdsourced, we have 12,000 reports. I would say 90% of them come through the face-to-face interactions that we've had. So we've done workshops, awareness workshops on what is sexual harassment, violence, abuse, the whole spectrum, and the legislation that is in effect in India to help people understand they have the right to speak up. And we believe that 90% of those reports come from when we do those workshops, because everything is designed to help them report. Having said that, every single report is read before we approve it. We cannot verify it because people do not leave their names or emails. In the few cases that they do and where we feel, a response is required, we reach out to them. I'll give you an example. There was a particular report that, actually there were 3 reports that named a professor in a university, a top university, and it was a very, very niche field of, I think it was aerospace. So, yeah, and then I Googled the professor's name, and he was a highly recognized and awarded person by the government of India, like the really top medal holder or whatever. And so this person had left his email. So we reached out and we asked him to get on a call. He was reporting on behalf of his friends who were in that university. He was actually in a different city. So we requested if his friends could report their own cases rather than rely on him. And we also suggested several options, because when in very niche, and you will know this from the Me Too movement, when it is specific siloed industries, it's even harder to talk about sexual violence because of the fear of retaliation. And we went through the whole process. We said we won't reveal the identity. We will approach the college, because every college in India has a women's development cell. We'll just say we had a particular report about a particular professor. We won't name the department, and we recommend taking, doing workshops for faculty, things like that. But they did not want to go ahead with it. And whenever we get a case of a report which names a name, we redact it. So that is one. We also had a case where a spurt of reports came from a particular IP address. And it clearly, they were talking about several people being abusive, but it was not really sexual violence in our opinion. It was more hate crime or something like that. But it felt like the person who was reporting had a mental issue. So, but they didn't leave their name and email. So on Facebook, where we have a great following, and on Twitter as well, we just said, we've got a series of reports from this city. Can you please get in touch with us? The reporting actually stopped. So there are ways to screen out some reports which don't make the cut, but in reality, most of the reports come in where we have interventions. I must also tell you that the last few reports we got, one was from Boston and one was from South Africa, Peter Maritzburg, where we don't have any people on the ground or any intervention. So I guess it's like building momentum over a period of time, like TripAdvisor. Everybody leaves comments about, institutions. And as a woman, as a traveler, who travels on work and leisure alone, I actually find value in those comments. I look at them because I'm responsible for my own safety. So I envision Safe City to be a repository of many people's experiences, so that I can, at the end of the day, make the best decision for myself.
It's an interesting point, because at the far extreme, you've got Catherine, where a lot of, 90% of the work is online. All that information gathering, the mobilizing is actually online. But Elsa, you've actually sort of come back to the fact that the human touch is at the center of it. And I think, Joshua, you're somewhere in between, because you've got a lot of engagement with people and actual citizens actually coming back to you through SMS, which I won't say is an online thing, but it's a human contact piece. So how do you kind of also mediate the risk, particularly with the fact that not everybody's going to be straightforward in the story they're telling?
Right. So I think we'll be fortunate, because the model for us is that the information that we receive is first a cue, a T, a source for our journalists. So it's the work of a journalist, that we have to go to those places. So they kind of give us a location to go and monitor, or to go and report. So what we do most times is send journalists to go investigate, those issues. So even when you give us a leak and you say X amount of money, or you even give us documents that shows this amount of money has been embezzled, or that there are no doctors in these places. So we take it as hypothesis. So we send either our own journalists or other journalists from, that are closer, to the place or the location to go verify. That's one way that we go about it. Another way is to look at other news sources that have either reported something similar, or even for civil society organizations that work in those, communities to help. So we kind of do manual, and sometimes we network, But one innovative way that we've approached it is also to create a target group of monitors. And we realize that in every state in Nigeria, at least, you have a tertiary institution, a university, and in most of these universities, you have what you call press clubs, but they are like campus journalists. So we started training the campus journalists in the art of reporting, and how to also use mobile tools for verification and for as accountability work. So when those reports come in, we send them to the field. So not only do we wait for citizens who probably don't even know how to, report in English because of literacy challenge, but we also have people who are literate who also understand, the mechanisms of reporting or investigating to then go to the field. And then when we started doing that, we started having more reports on those crowdsourced platforms than what we would have when we were relying on SMSs. So that's how we've been able to balance it.
Catherine, have you had any spectacular failures where you think, here's a really important cause, and then it kind of doesn't go anywhere?
I think it's hard. It's hard for me to say that because honestly, there are, and I think this is one of the sort of strengths of the model of crowdsourcing the campaigns, is that there are thousands of campaigns on every issue being run on change.org on any given day. I think that in terms of where, just picking up a little bit, I think on the question that we talked about, that you were talking about here of online, offline interaction and data. I think maybe one of the places, and this is definitely a learning that I feel like we've taken on very strongly here at the Change.org Foundation in the last few years, is that I think for a long time we concentrated a lot on the online mobilizing component of our work and of, the generating, at times, which is really good, thousands or even millions of people's support for campaigns by sending out emails. I think what's become really interesting is that we've realized that actually for people who are starting those campaigns, who are really, have to be really important in creating that social change, a huge amount of that work is not always happening online, is actually happening offline. So when we look at, where people, where someone who is starting a campaign draws support from, it's often from friends or family or networks that they have around them, physical networks. And also, that then, as they're pushing through that, and when a campaign actually reaches or is trying to, create a concrete outcome, that actually the offline again becomes really important, because usually, I wouldn't say never, but like very rarely will a campaign win just through online mobilization with no meeting with the person, the political leader or the decision maker in charge. So, and then at the end of that journey, there is also another big component, which, involves the person who's running the campaign and people who are part of that campaign going to meet with the political leader. And so I think if you ask me, where have we sort of overlooked in the past, I would say that is a piece that we all sort of knew was happening, but maybe didn't sort of concentrate on. And now we're really concentrating on okay, what are the interventions we can make at both of those points?
May I add to that? So, to take off on what she's saying is, we had this young woman who was traveling on a bus from Goa to Bangalore, and it was an overnight bus and a sleeper bus. And she woke up early in the morning to find that the the helper on the bus was actually touching her. That's what she woke up to. And, she was taken aback and she was upset. Now, she happened to be on a tech team that was working with us. They were working with Twitter and us. We were doing some kind of collaboration. And because she heard about Safe City and that we were crowd mapping sexual violence, she reported it on our site and also sent me an email. That's how I came to know about her incident. And she said that she made a complaint to the police because now she felt like, we need to speak up. So just having Safe City there allows people to think through, okay, I am not alone. I should go and make a report. So she went to the police station. They caught hold of the guy. They beat him up and let him go. And she said, but that's not what I want. I want to make sure this doesn't happen again. And she wanted the company, the bus company, to do something. So we, on her behalf, helped her write the mail to the bus company. They didn't respond, So she used change. And the change petition then got the company to actually respond back saying that they would change their policies and, whether they would do background checks, I can't remember, but they did take some action. And what I think what she was trying to say is that sometimes we don't even know the impact of just having these crowdsourced platforms. The idea is to facilitate somebody to document their story and somebody else to access that story. Unless they tell us what they've done with it, we may never ever know.
Good. All right, I'm going to open it up to people in the room to ask questions. Please, can you keep your questions or your comments, interventions short, so we get a lot of them in, and I'll sort of do 3 at a time. I think some microphones are going to come around. So gentleman over here, 1, in the middle, 2, and the lady in green, 3. Please let us know who you are and where you're from.
Hi, I'm Daniel Klingenberg. I'm a lawyer who does rule of law and election work from ASU, Arizona State Law. Short 2-part question really is, how resilient are these systems to authoritarian regimes? Where I'm working is often very repressive governments. And in this light, how do we keep this information protected when it needs to be anonymous, especially with the challenges of data security these days?
Great questions. Gentleman in the gray jacket.
Hi, thank you for the good discussion. I'm Kuskandi Abdushafi. I'm researcher and independent consultant on peace building and governance. My question is about the integrity of your data. And this brings the question that the mapping of the sexual crimes always have intersectionality with the economic status of the community. And this particularly in a country where economy starts off. Majority of the crimes committed by very rich people, powerful people are not reached to the court. And this in India, exactly when you put your cameras, for instance, are put in the neighborhood where the poor community, their buses and trains, while the people who are committing mass crimes are living in mansions in a very expensive and luxury cities. And this is the same story in Nigeria, in different places. And what are kind of approach you use to reframe this narrative and try to make sure that the gender laws are not only perceived by the community as frameworks and policies to oppress poor and exempt the rich people? Thank you.
The lady in green.
My name is Shimura Koistani. I'm from Democracy Council. My question is about the app Safe City. How are you, have you, I'm not sure at the local level, been able to use the data to change a policy within a government institution? Or do you have a vision that could be a data-driven system that you use to bring change at the national level? Because sexual assault or harassment is endemic in the world, especially in countries like India, Afghanistan, or Middle East, where women doesn't really talk about it much. And also in terms of promoting the app, I know you said 90% of your information comes from face-to-face introversion. have you tried to promote it online, or what were the backlashes that people reported, and people who didn't report it, why not? What was, of course, as a woman, I know the rest, but in terms of the question the gentleman asked, how are we ensuring the data is secret so people feel comfortable coming to report an incident?
Great. Well, I don't think any of you come from what I would call authoritarian regimes, but there are issues about closing space.
Yeah.
Certainly in all three places. Let me go to Joseph first, and to answer as much as you can of that question, which is, how resilient is this sort of process and mechanism to governments or political actors trying to close the space, and how do you keep the information protected given the importance of anonymity and non-retaliation?
Right. So I think the resilience will come from, say, pockets of outcomes or results that, these initiatives generate, right? So as much as government is trying to silence or gag the press, right? The amount of stories that you are able to tell of an attack on the press, and the use of social media, to kind of amplify the issue, sometimes becomes the way to. It is one way that's been helping to kind of sustain or remain resilient. I'll give you a good example, which happened pretty much about a month ago in Nigeria. There is a show on a broadcaster on TV who was doing a critical analysis of policy and governance in the country, and all of a sudden the Broadcasting Commission shut down the television, and the entire social media space took that up, and the media sector, the civil society, and citizens said, no, this is wrong, and what happened is 2-3 days down the line, they had to resolve it, within, that system without, either the initial case was to withdraw the license for that newspaper, for that media outlet to broadcast. But because of, the social, mobilization, around the issue. So I think social mobilization and the results. So it kind of created a space for journalists to know that I just need to shout when it's necessary, and people rally around. And so I feel like successes like that is one way, and that resilience has been built. The international community sometimes also helps to, kind of reinforce, or, you see the kind of work that NDI and the rest do in building the capacity of, local initiatives to continue to think about or brainstorm about how to remain relevant and how to continue to stand up against, populism or authoritarian regimes in the country. How do we protect the data? I wouldn't say that we are there yet, right? But it's just using tools of anonymity is one way that we also protect ourselves. So we don't even know. There's no way you can either force me either through any government or I would say legal means to reveal who my source is or who gave me the information. So I think anonymity is one way that we've been able to do that, to make sure that we both ends is trusted, is secured, and also kind of build trust, among us. At instances where data needs to transfer hands, for instance, when someone sends SMS, right? So we have, if nothing, the phone number that sent the SMS. What we try to do is to make sure that that is also put in a secure platform. So from the technology design phase, we try to ask ourselves the questions, so what are leakages or areas where this data can be endangered, and try to block that.
So data privacy, you don't need to sign up to report on our app. So on the web app, there's no sign up at all. On the mobile app, for some features, you if you wish to engage, you need to sign up, but otherwise you don't need to sign up at all. You can skip all the formalities. And we've been working, my colleagues from Vital Voices are here, and we are working with them under their Voices Against Violence program, which is with the State Department, to ensure that our data is secure and our protocols are secure as well. So we've tried our best to do that. Of course, with any system, there could be some kind of failure. So with every iteration, every year we look at how best is our data secure. Coming to the intersectionality of it, there's always intersectionality. When it comes to sexual violence, it's a myth that it's only in low-income communities. It's across the economic spectrum. Therefore, I don't think it's true that it's only in low-income communities. Since we are mapping public spaces, it's more about streets, about transport systems, outside educational institutions. Especially in India, we have a lot of girls' colleges. So that's where we are seeing it. And then we give the data back to the community to decide how do they want to proceed. So that's where the local context comes into play. So, we can't dictate any solution. We can only offer suggestions, but we found the most innovative ways come from the community themselves. A partner from Vital Voices who's mapping in Kibera, which is one of the largest informal settlements in Kenya. She used the information to to educate her community over community radio, but she also got the religious leaders involved to talk to the men and boys. And that seemed to have a big effect. So here, when we are talking about what is being reported on our site, it's very little rape and assault, which is what we all only get excited about when we talk of sexual violence. We ignore the verbal and non-verbal and other physical forms of violence which actually happen on a daily basis, and that's what the bulk of the reporting is about. So if you go to our site, it's about, I was stared at, it made me feel really uncomfortable, I had this man flash at me whilst I was jogging, I was followed from the station to my home, things like that, Now, you may think that that is so trivial, but just 2 days back, I did a BBC radio interview with a French girl. She was assaulted last year. So she was walking on the streets of Paris, and a man made some sexual sounds. So she, she's really young, and she's one of the rare ones who actually spoke up. So she just said, "Shut up." He followed her, he threw an ashtray at her. She ducked, she missed. He followed her further and punched her in the face. And this was captured on the CCTV camera of a cafe that was nearby. And it upset her a lot. She went home, she was crying, and then she spoke with some friends who said, "You must speak up." Went back, got the CCTV footage, took it to the police, filed a complaint. The CCTV footage went viral. And then after the case went to the court, etc., the judgment came as it was a physical assault. And she says, "I'm not happy because it was not just a physical assault, it was a sexual assault." But the court did not recognize that. So we are fighting systems. In India, we do not have a problem of legislation. It is the accountability that is the issue and the implementation of the system. So when you go, if you, in the rare case, go to the police to make your complaint, they will always file it in a lesser category. Most crimes against women, the laws are cognizable offenses. Cognizable offenses means you have to file a FIR, first information report, which means the police have to investigate the case. If proven true, it goes through the justice system. They will make you file it as a non-cognizable offense, counting on the fact that you as a citizen do not know the law, which is true in most cases. So you make a complaint, it's actually a book entry, doesn't become an official statistic. So it doesn't go through the system. So that is the first thing that we have to fight, right? Like creating that awareness on both sides that there are laws. The laws need to be implemented. And then how do we get the justice system to not take 20 years to hear a case? in the 20 years, the woman is reliving her experience over and over again. So what happens is there's another issue in India where women withdraw their cases just so that they don't have to deal with this trauma over and over again. So now there's men's rights groups claiming these are all false cases because women have withdrawn. But we're not trying to understand that the system is actually designed to be against us. So most of our work is making these things accountable.
Catherine, do you have any instances or anything to add on the issue of data protection in particular, I guess? Because most of your petitions are aimed at policy change or some kind of other reform.
Yeah, so I think that with the issue of data protection, I think we are in a position where obviously that is a concern and it is a question that we constantly ask. And I think the change.org, the company here, mostly based in San Francisco, has a team of engineers that works on that question, on like how do we make sure that we keep people's data secure, and that is, you know, always been a very big part of what we do. I think that one of the questions, and addressing a little bit the question around, you know, how do we use data gathered by an organization like Safe Cities or like through Joshua's work to, you know, how can that be leveraged up to push for policy change? I think that's an example for me of where partnerships are really critical. Because as we mentioned with the Safer Buses campaign that sort of came through Safe Cities and then became a change.org petition, one of the things that we see often is that there is, particularly when many different people, but women especially, are bringing up campaigns around issues affecting their lives, data just doesn't exist to support that campaign. And so even if, you know, you get a sympathetic minister or, you know, somebody who wants to take action, the data doesn't exist or the data hasn't been collected. And so I think there's a real case, and we've seen this, for example, you know, we're sort of talking a lot about India in this context, but I think it works really well here, where, you know, we had a woman leading a campaign in India around male sexual assault and of children, INSEA, who I know Elsa is also familiar with. And she went to the government, she had a successful meeting with the Minister for Women and Children, they wanted to take action, and they literally said, we can't without the data. So the next step of your campaign has to be to gather, you know, data to support this. And so for me, I think there's a real opportunity to bring together organizations like change.org that, you know, and the Change.org Foundation, where we have this experience in terms of campaigning and elevating people's stories and connecting with decision makers and with the media, with organizations that are doing, you know, really data-driven work on these issues, especially that are not being talked about, you know, or traditionally have not been talked about or addressed by maybe mainstream institutions.
Right.
And I wanted to just mention quickly on the question about resilience in the face of authoritarian regimes and closing civic space is something that our teams around the world, we talk about a lot. And I think it's definitely something that we have been observing. And one of the ways I think actually here that we address that, and that maybe is slightly different, is that we don't see, there is obviously many issues that people bring up, and some of them at times seem potentially more trivial than others. And I'll give you an example. I think that people mobilizing to, you know, protect a local playground, we may say, well, is that really as important as changing a national law on, you know, child safety? But actually what we can see is that with a journey of engagement, people taking action on a local playground is a first step in that journey to hopefully moving them towards a place where one day they will be part of a movement to pass a national law. And I think in spaces where closing civic space is an issue, what we've really doubled down on is this idea that, like, we do still need to be bringing people in to start that journey. We can't just stop just because that's from the top down, it's being pressed down, but we can continue our work and double down on the efforts that we have at a local level on issues where maybe the threat is less strong, so that over time, and we've seen this happen, in several countries, we can build movements of people who are ready to take that next step when the opportunity arises.
Great. Another round of questions from the room. Julia, please. 1, 2, 3.
I'm Gwen Dillard. I have a question for Joshua. How do you use crowdsourcing and the data drivers that you've described in your election monitoring?
And then behind.
Hi, I'm Noah Bell from the University of Maryland, College Park. I had a question for Catherine actually about change.org. I was wondering a little bit just whether you think there's an issue with the platform itself being inherently gendered and the fact that it emphasizes sort of individualistic complaints when we know that women are often more relational in their approach to taking action. And so what are some of the ways in which you are thinking about addressing the ways in which the platform prioritizes the way that we know that men tend to engage with society?
And Courtney.
Hi, I'm Courtney Hess here at NDI. I work on our programs in West Africa, and we often work with populations who aren't necessarily connected to technology and have access to some of these apps and other online platforms. So I'm curious on 2 points. One, when you're talking about crowdsourced data, how do you reflect that in the fact that it might not necessarily be representative of all populations because all populations don't have the opportunity to participate? And then the second part of the question is how do we combine these digital forms of activism with some of the more analog forms of activism that we are also doing to ensure that those voices are also a part of this process and that their experiences are also heard?
Anybody else? You did raise it. Just.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask something very similar, but perhaps.
Hi, Hillary Collins from IFAS. Just to add on to that a bit about access to these platforms, and was curious to hear more specifically about some other marginalized groups, perhaps persons with disabilities or youth or indigenous populations. How might they access these platforms?
Great. Thanks very much. So, Joshua, you were specifically targeted for election.
Thank you. And thank you for asking the question because I didn't say much about how we use crowdsourcing for election when I did the introduction. We actually, in 2015, when the election was hard, we had election in Nigeria, what we did was to create a hashtag which we call snap and send. So we told citizens, and that was to respond to the issue of ballot theft or how results of election can be manipulated before they get to the central repository. So what we did was to say to citizens, don't just wait for the votes to be counted. When it is counted and it's pasted on the wall, take a picture of it and send it with that hashtag across all platforms: Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, and we will get it. That was still the experiment in 2015. We didn't get a lot of feedback. One, because we started late. We didn't have enough promotion across all the states. And how we kind of scale that from 2018, when we started having some national elections in the country or run-up election, which probably will be a response to the question you asked about how do you balance digital with either native or local or other ways, was the point I mentioned earlier. We started training campus journalists because we knew they were in every state, right? We trained them on how to monitor the election. We got the polling unit data and gave it to them. And we looked at hotspots within the election cycle and said, we positioned them there, to complement what we got from our Snap and Send, a social platform. But they were on the ground, not only to give us what was the final result, but to give us an entire, monitoring of the election cycle or the election day, and so that's how we've been able to use both social media and targeted citizens to monitor the election in Nigeria. Something it's interesting that by the time we are done in about 3 states, citizens started asking us on social media and say, we're hoping that you're going to do this for us in the presidential election. But we didn't have all the resources, to go to all the 36 states. Of course, we are not the Electoral Commission, right? But we still did our best and, to make sure that but we saw that citizens were following what we were doing. They relied on what we were doing, and it helped a lot in curbing amount of, result manipulation that you would rather have. If you've been following the issue in Nigeria, you see that the opposition party keeps saying that the results of the election, was falsified, right? And what is it mainly relying on? Some of these, social media or crowdsourced data that is out there that is already showing that even though the Electoral Commission had, said the ruling party is the winner, the crowdsourced data is not saying the same thing. So that's how much of what that has been able to do in the country.
Alpha, do you want to talk about the access issue? Because I think the gendered ways of action is very much a Catherine issue.
Yes, that's a great question, actually. So when I first started Safe City, it was meant to be an online platform, and then I'm a Vital Voices fellow, and I went for one of the regional meetups, and I met this woman, Jane, from Kenya. And she was really interested in what I was doing. And she said, can I use your app? And then she told me what she was doing in Kenya, in Kibera. So she had what she calls talking boxes. So in school, she had just placed these boxes where children would put little notes telling her what was going on with them. The teacher touched them, things like that. So what we partnered with was digitizing her data. And subsequently, we have used her idea of talking boxes in several locations in the rural areas. The women designed their own boxes, and now our partner, another Vital Voices member in Malaysia, is planning to use talking boxes. They want to collect these stories to use as evidence for legislation because they don't have laws on, public space harassment. So there are many ways to report, not just the web app and the mobile app. In India, we also have a missed call facility. So you call a number, it gets disconnected, and then we call you back, we get your story. So you don't even have to pay for the call. We have people writing in, and in the local communities where we have partners, they even fill up paper forms. If you're illiterate, you can dictate your story to someone and they upload it. So we've made it. So for me, technology should not be the barrier. Technology is just a way to digitize this data so you can look at it differently. We've also integrated it in our workshops where helping people look at a map. So we give them a map and we make them do exercises where they start putting their stories on a map, physical dots. And we say, okay, now how does this make you feel? And you won't believe, a lot of young girls tell us, oh, I didn't realize that it was not just me who was getting harassed outside my college. I didn't know it was happening to so many other girls. So just visually seeing this, sometimes you feel so alone in your experience. And most of us would have been told, oh, you were the problem, you were wearing the wrong thing, you were at the wrong place at the wrong time. But when you can see a trend, that it was not just one woman, 5 women were harassed at this street corner, it helps you think through and say, it was not my fault, it has to be something else.
And what about representativeness? Because I think that was the other part of Courtney's question, is that do these ways of collecting information actually incline to those who already have some voice or can have voice, as opposed to those who are really much more marginalized?
So it really depends. In low-income communities, they have never ever spoken up. They never thought that they could speak up. They never thought that they could even ask the police to change beat patrol timings. We have this community sabhas. Sabhas are like community meetings. So in the local community, they invite the police to come to a sabha, and at one in Delhi, it was a new person who joined the job, and they said, the crime against women are increasing. What are you doing about it? And he said, oh, we don't have any statistic. There's been no report filed in my police station. And they gave him 200 paper reports that they had collected in their community. He had to make a public retraction of his statement, and he promised that he would change beat patrol. Not only that, he invited the youth to come to the police station. He took them around, So it's about building trust. These are institutions which you don't really trust at the citizen level and at the community level. I have another case where highly empowered women in a suburb in Bombay, very, not very rich, but it's pretty aspirational. These are educated women who also didn't speak up, okay? And then they made a representation. The police invited them in, made them sit down, gave them a cup of tea and coffee, which was not expected. So when, these are small gestures that kind of build the trust. He asked his inspector, when was the last time there was a crime? He said, oh, it was more than 6 months ago. And they said, no, in the last 6 months, we've had 20 attempts of chain snatching. Chain snatching, most of us wear gold. We love our gold. So, he said, oh, I believe that. Now, I'll tell you, 20 women, and these are educated women working from home. Okay, I won't say housewives, but these are women who, who turn up at a police station. They don't want a media reporter showing up, because the next thing you know, it's going to be on the front page of the newspapers, right? So this was actually my first case where I saw it working in action, where you could just show up at the police station and he accepted this data, which was, crowdsourced, unverified, anonymous, and there has been no robbery in that neighborhood since then, And that's when I said, okay, here I'm onto something, and we've tried it in different locations, across geographies, across economic strata of society, and it's the same. I think you cannot dispute when you have a data set.
And Catherine, are you forcing women to act in male ways?
My gosh, I hope not. But I do think it's a really interesting question, because this is exactly something that we have been working actually a lot on with the She Creates Change program, starting in India and now in Brazil and in Indonesia, which is this idea that I think initially we started out thinking, okay, the aim is to create more women champions, I guess is sort of one of the words that we use, like these leaders, spokespeople, people who could speak in front of the media. That was the way that, we would create change. And what has happened with the evolution and growth of the She Creates Change community, and this emphasis that I think I mentioned in the beginning around both increasing personal agency but also viewing community support as one of the critical pillars, is that we have realized that there are actually, and we've seen this in action, and we know that other people know this, that in a community there are many different roles. And we've started to identify those roles of what we call enablers, so people who support, who support maybe the women who are the front face of a campaign, connectors, so people who play the role of like, oh, you need an expert in law, I know an expert in law, you need to file something with the police, let me help you do that. And these things have always happened, but they've always happened, organically. We recognize that when we support people who are running campaigns, how do we shift what you mentioned, that external narrative, to really actually, publicly recognize the different roles that people play and can play in a campaign like that.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm afraid we've run out of time. I had a question. It's probably a good reason not to ask it, which is, so what can NDI do to help you all? Of that, because I've got lots of NDI colleagues in the room, I'm sure they don't want me to ask that question. But thank you to Elsa and to Catherine and to Joshua for this afternoon. Really, I've learned a lot, and I thank you also for participating and engaging with this. So a round of applause for our speakers, please.
Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you.
See you soon. Okay.